A whispered question in a hotel bar changed everything. But could two broken hearts learn that love isn't about losing yourself? It's about finding the courage to be seen? He never thought a business conference would change his life. But then again, life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. David was 32 years old, sitting alone at a hotel bar in Miami, nursing a glass of water and watching other professionals network around him. The conference hall buzzed with energy, people exchanging business cards and laughing at jokes he couldn't hear from where he sat. He'd been divorced for 6 months now, and this was his first trip alone since everything fell apart. His marriage had lasted 7 years. 7 years of trying to be someone he wasn't, of molding himself into the perfect husband his wife wanted. When she finally left, she told him he was too boring, too predictable. Those words still stung even now. So here he was, forcing himself to attend this 3-day conference in Miami, trying to prove to himself that he could still function in the world. The opening keynote earlier that day had been about innovation and taking risks in business. David found it ironic. He'd spent his entire life avoiding risks, playing it safe. That's what financial analysts do, right? Calculate the odds, minimize the danger, protect the bottom line. He was about to head back to his room when he noticed her. She was standing near the entrance of the bar, looking around with confidence that seemed to light up the space around her. Her dress was elegant but bold, deep blue that caught the ambient lighting. But it wasn't what she wore that grabbed his attention. It was the way she carried herself, like she owned every room she walked into. Their eyes met for just a second. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and David quickly looked away, feeling his face flush. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for anything. This seat taken? Her voice was warm with a hint of playfulness. David looked up, surprised to find her standing right next to him. Up close, she was even more striking. Not in a conventional way, but in a way that made you want to know her story. "No, it's free," he managed to say, gesturing to the empty stool. "Good, because I've been standing in heels for 3 hours, and my feet are screaming at me," she said, sliding onto the seat with a sigh of relief. "I'm Natasha, by the way, marketing director from New York. David, financial analyst, Seattle." "Seattle," she repeated, smiling. "I've always wanted to visit." "Is it really as rainy as everyone says?" "Only about 200 days a year," he replied, and she laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not the polite kind people give at networking events. They started talking, and David was surprised at how easy it felt. Usually, conversations at these events were forced, full of industry jargon and thinly veiled attempts to sell something. But with Natasha, it was different. She asked him real questions, not about his company or his position, but about him, what he liked to do outside of work, what dreams he'd put on hold, why he looked so tired. That last question caught him off guard. "Do I look tired?" he asked, trying to deflect with humor. "You look like someone carrying weight they don't want to talk about," she said softly. "Trust me, I recognize it. I see it in the mirror every morning." There was something disarming about her honesty. Most people wore masks at these events, presenting their best professional selves. But Natasha seemed to have left her mask at the door. The hours slipped by. They talked about work, yes, but also about life. She told him about growing up in New York, the daughter of immigrants who worked 3 jobs to give her opportunities. She talked about climbing the corporate ladder so fast, she sometimes forgot to look around and enjoy the view. About being so focused on success that she'd never made time for a real relationship. David found himself opening up too, something he rarely did. He told her about his divorce, about feeling like a failure for not being able to make it work, about spending 7 years trying to be someone else and losing himself in the process. "You know what I think?" Natasha said, leaning closer. "I think you're not boring at all. I think you've been playing it safe for so long you forgot what it feels like to take a risk." "Maybe," David admitted, "but taking risks has consequences. I'm not sure I'm ready for more consequences." "Fair enough," she said, studying him with those intelligent eyes. "But here's the thing about playing it safe. It protects you from getting hurt, sure, but it also keeps you from really living." The crowd around them had thinned considerably. David glanced at his watch and was shocked to see it was nearly midnight. They'd been talking for over 4 hours. "I should probably head up," he said reluctantly. "Early morning session tomorrow." "Yeah, me too," Natasha said, but she didn't move. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Playful but also vulnerable, testing but genuine. The lighting in the bar had dimmed, creating an intimate atmosphere. Music played softly in the background, something jazzy and smooth. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sure," David replied, his heart suddenly beating faster. She leaned in close, so close he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Her eyes locked onto his, and there was a spark there, something electric that made the air between them feel charged. "You want to know if I'm not wearing anything underneath?" she whispered, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. David felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. His mind went blank. Was she serious? Was this a joke, a test? His face felt hot, and he was certain he was blushing like a teenager. I don't, he stammered, completely thrown off balance. Natasha's smile widened. But there was something vulnerable in her eyes too, like she was taking as much of a risk as he was. "Relax," she said, her voice still soft. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I'm just being honest about the fact that I'm attracted to you, and I'm tired of playing games. Life's too short to pretend we don't feel what we feel." David's analytical mind tried to process this. Every instinct told him to retreat, to play it safe, to thank her for the evening and go to his room alone. That was the smart move, the predictable move. But something else stirred inside him, something that had been dormant for years, a part of him that wanted to take a risk, to step outside his comfort zone, to stop being the boring, predictable person his ex-wife had accused him of being. "I don't know what to say," he finally admitted, his voice honest. I'm not usually the kind of person who takes chances." Natasha finished for him, her expression softening. "I know, I can tell. But maybe that's exactly why you should." They sat there in the dimly lit bar, the question hanging between them like a bridge he could choose to cross or burn. David looked at this woman, this confident, beautiful, complicated woman who had somehow seen through his defenses in just a few hours. She terrified him, and excited him, and made him feel more alive than he had in years. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "You could have your pick of anyone here." "Because you're real," she said simply. "Everyone else here is trying to impress me or use me for connections or sell me something. But you're just trying to figure out how to be yourself again, and I find that incredibly attractive." The bartender cleared his throat, a gentle reminder that they were closing up. "We should go," Natasha said, standing up. David stood too, his legs feeling unsteady. They walked toward the elevators in silence, the tension between them palpable. When the elevator doors opened, they both stepped inside. Natasha pressed the button for the 7th floor. "What floor are you on?" she asked. 7, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled. Fate has a sense of humor. The elevator climbed slowly, and David's mind raced. What was happening? What should he do? What did he want to do? For once in his life, he didn't have an answer calculated and ready. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, and they both stepped out into the quiet hallway. The carpet muffled their footsteps as they walked, and David's heart pounded so loud he was sure Natasha could hear it. They stopped at her door first. "Room 724. She turned to face him, and in the soft hallway lighting, she looked different, less confident, more uncertain. It made her seem more real, more human. "Listen," she said, her voice quiet. "I may have come on a bit strong back there. That's kind of my thing. I say what I'm thinking, and sometimes it gets me in trouble." David smiled, feeling some of the tension ease. "No, it's okay. Actually, it's refreshing. Most people don't say what they really mean." "Yeah, but I probably scared you half to death," she said with a small laugh. "Look, the truth is, I find you interesting. And I don't want this night to end. But I also don't want you to think I'm some kind of—" "I don't think that," David interrupted. "Honestly, I think you're brave. You say what you feel. I've spent so many years not doing that, I forgot what it's like." Natasha studied his face for a moment, then made a decision. "You want to get out of here? I mean, out of the hotel? Get some fresh air?" "It's almost midnight," David said, but even as he said it, he knew he was going to say yes. "So? We're in Miami. The city doesn't sleep. Come on. Let's go walk on the beach or something. Just talk." 20 minutes later, they were walking barefoot on Miami Beach, their shoes in their hands, the cool sand between their toes. The ocean stretched out before them, dark and endless, waves rolling in with a rhythmic sound that was somehow calming. "I haven't done anything spontaneous in years," David admitted. "Watching the waves catch the moonlight, really? Not even small things?" Natasha asked. "Nope. My ex-wife used to plan everything. Our weekends, our vacations, even our conversations sometimes. She had this whole vision of what our life should look like, and I just went along with it. Why? David thought about that. I guess I thought that's what love was, compromise, making the other person happy, being what they needed. But what about what you needed? Natasha asked, stopping to look at him. I don't think I ever asked myself that question. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. David felt something loosening inside his chest. Like a knot that had been tied for years was finally starting to come undone. Can I tell you something? Natasha said eventually. Something I don't usually admit to people? Of course. I've never been in a real relationship. I'm 29 years old and I've never let anyone get close enough to matter. She paused, looking out at the ocean. Everyone thinks I'm so confident, so together. But the truth is, I'm terrified of letting someone in. What if they see the real me and decide I'm not worth it? David was surprised by her honesty. The real you seems pretty great to me. You don't know me, she said, but there was a smile in her voice. Maybe not yet, but I'd like to. They found a 24-hour diner a few blocks from the beach, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a menu that had seen better days. A tired waitress brought them coffee and they ordered key lime pie to share because Natasha insisted you couldn't come to Florida and not have key lime pie. So that thing you said earlier, David began, stirring sugar into his coffee. In the bar, were you serious or was it just a test? Natasha finished grinning. Both, actually. I wanted to see how you'd react. Most guys would have either run away or gotten all weird and aggressive, but you just got flustered and honest. I like that. I'm not very good at games, David admitted. That's what I'm counting on, she said. I'm tired of games too. I've played them my whole career. Be tough, don't show weakness. Don't let them see you sweat. I'm exhausted from it all. The pie arrived and they ate it slowly, talking between bites. Natasha told him about her family, about how her parents had worked so hard to give her opportunities, and how sometimes she felt guilty for not being happier with everything she'd achieved. David told her about his marriage, about the slow realization that he'd become a stranger to himself. Do you still love her? Natasha asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question. No, David said, and he realized it was true. I think I loved who I thought she was or who I thought I could be with her. But it wasn't real. It was just two people playing roles. What role were you playing? The perfect husband, the stable provider, the guy who never made waves, and who are you really? David thought about that for a long moment. I'm still figuring that out. Natasha reached across the table and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt significant. Well, from what I can see so far, the real you is pretty interesting. They left the diner around 3 in the morning and walked back to the hotel slowly, neither of them wanting the night to end. The streets were quiet now, just a few cars passing by, the city settling into that peaceful hour before dawn. In the hotel lobby, they stood by the elevators again. The night clerk nodded at them sleepily from behind the desk. I should probably get some sleep, David said, but he didn't move toward the elevator button. Probably, Natasha agreed, also not moving. They looked at each other and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or possibility, or just the recognition that this night had meant something, even if they didn't quite know what yet. Come upstairs with me, Natasha said suddenly. Just to talk? I'm not ready for this to end, David hesitated. His rational mind kicked in, listing all the reasons this was a bad idea. He barely knew her. He was still recovering from his divorce. This could complicate everything. But then he thought about what she'd said earlier, about taking risks, about really living. Okay, he said. Her hotel room was neat, professional. Laptop open on the desk, conference materials spread out, a half-empty water bottle on the nightstand. She kicked off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space next to her. David sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. You can relax, she said, smiling. I'm not going to attack you. I know. This is all very new to me. They talked for another hour, sitting on that bed, fully clothed, just talking. About dreams they'd given up on. About fears they'd never voiced. About the pressure to have everything figured out when inside, you're still just trying to understand yourself. At some point, Natasha's head dropped onto David's shoulder. She was exhausted, he realized. Behind all that confidence was someone who was just as tired and uncertain as he was. Hey, he said softly. You're falling asleep. she murmured. Is that okay? Can you just stay for a bit? Yeah, David said. I can stay. He didn't mean to fall asleep. He just meant to sit there until she was really asleep, then quietly leave. But the day had been long, the night even longer, and before he knew it, his eyes were closing too. When David woke up, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. He was still on the bed, still fully dressed. Natasha was curled up next to him, also fully clothed, her head still on his shoulder. For a moment, he just lay there, feeling her breathing, feeling more peaceful than he had in months. Then reality crashed in. The conference. The final day. His flight home tomorrow. This magical night that existed outside of real life was ending. Natasha stirred, opened her eyes, and looked up at him. For a second, she seemed confused, then she remembered, and smiled. Hi, she said softly. Hi, he replied. We fell asleep. Yeah. With our clothes on. Yeah, she laughed, sitting up and running her hands through her hair. That's definitely a first for me. Usually if I have a guy in my room, we're not doing much sleeping. David felt his face flush and she laughed again. Sorry, too much information. I just mean, this was nice. Different. Real. It was, David agreed. They looked at each other, and the weight of the morning settled over them. The conference ended today. She lived in New York, he lived in Seattle. This was just one night, one beautiful, unexpected night, and then they'd go back to their separate lives. What happens now? David asked, voicing what they were both thinking. Natasha bit her lip, looking uncertain for the first time since he'd met her. I don't know. I want to say we exchange numbers, stay in touch, see where this goes. But I'm also scared. I don't do this. I don't let people in. I know, David said. I'm scared too. They sat there in the morning light. Two people who'd found something unexpected and now had to decide what to do with it. The real world was waiting outside that hotel room, with all its complications and distances and fears. But for just a moment more, they were still in the bubble of that perfect night, when anything seemed possible. 3 months had passed since Miami, and David found himself staring at his phone again, reading the last message Natasha had sent him. It was a photo of the New York skyline at sunset with the caption, "Thinking about you." That was 2 hours ago. He'd typed and deleted at least 5 different responses. This was becoming a pattern, and he knew it. After the conference ended, they'd exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, and they had at first. Text messages every day, then video calls every week. Long conversations that stretched late into the night, where they'd talk about everything and nothing. David felt more connected to her than he'd ever felt to his ex-wife, even though they were 3,000 miles apart. But lately, something had shifted. The messages came less frequently. The video calls got shorter, and David could feel her pulling away, even though she never said it directly. His friend Robert noticed the change in him. They were having lunch at their usual spot near the office when Robert finally brought it up. So, you going to tell me what's going on with you? Robert asked, putting down his sandwich. What do you mean? Come on, man. You've been distracted for weeks. You're always on your phone and you've got that look. What look? The look of a guy who's either in love or getting his heart broken. Sometimes both at the same time. David sighed, putting down his own food. I met someone. In Miami. At that conference one end. And she lives in New York. And I don't know what we're doing. We talk all the time, but it's not going anywhere. We're just stuck in this weird in-between place. Robert leaned back, studying him. You ever think about just going for it? Flying out there, seeing where it goes? I did. I booked a ticket for next weekend, actually. That's great. So why do you look like you're going to a funeral? Because I don't know if she wants me to. Every time we get close to making real plans, she changes the subject. And I'm starting to think maybe I'm reading this all wrong. Maybe Miami was just a moment and I'm the only one who thought it was something more. Robert shook his head. Or maybe she's just scared. From what you've told me about her, she doesn't sound like someone who's used to letting people in. Maybe, David said, but he wasn't convinced. That night, David video called Natasha. She answered on the 3rd ring and he could see her office behind her. It was late in New York, past 10, but she was still working. Hey, she said, and her smile seemed tired. Sorry, crazy day. We're launching a new campaign next week and everything's chaos. No worries. You look exhausted. I am, she admitted, rubbing her eyes. But it's good. The promotion is official now. I'm leading the entire East Coast division. That's amazing. Congratulations. Thanks, she said, but there was something in her voice. Something flat. You don't sound excited about it. Natasha was quiet for a moment. Can I be honest with you? Always. I thought this promotion would make me happy. I've been working toward it for 5 years. But now that I have it, I just feel empty. Like I climbed this mountain and when I got to the top, I realized I didn't even want to be there. David's heart ached for her. So what do you want? She looked at him through the screen and her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. I don't know. That's the problem. I've spent my whole life knowing exactly what I wanted and now I have no idea. Natasha, I booked a flight to New York for next weekend. I was going to surprise you, but maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe you need space to figure things out. Her expression changed and David couldn't read it. Surprise. Fear? Relief? You were going to fly out here? She asked softly. Yeah. I thought we could spend some real time together. See if this thing between us is just phone chemistry or something more. David, She started, then stopped. I don't know if that's a good idea right now. There it was. The rejection he'd been expecting. David felt his stomach drop. Okay, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think I understand it myself. She ran her hands through her hair, frustrated. I like you so much, but I'm terrified of what that means. Every time I think about you coming here, about us trying to make this real, I panic. What if I'm not good at relationships? What if I mess this up like I mess everything else up that isn't work? You won't know unless you try, David said gently. But that's just it. Trying means risking something. And if I lose you, if this doesn't work? She trailed off, looking away from the camera. Then at least we'll know, David finished. Isn't that better than spending the rest of our lives wondering what if? Natasha wiped at her eyes. Maybe you should cancel that flight. Give me some time to think. David felt something inside him break, but he nodded. Okay, if that's what you need. They said goodbye and the call ended. David sat in his apartment staring at the blank screen, feeling more alone than he had in months. The next 2 weeks were torture. Natasha's messages became even less frequent. When they did talk, the conversations were surface level, carefully avoiding anything too deep. David threw himself into work, trying not to think about her, trying not to check his phone every 5 minutes. His friends tried to help. Robert set him up on a blind date with his wife's coworker. Her name was Jennifer and she was nice, pretty, smart, worked in education, safe, predictable. Everything his friends thought he needed after the chaos of his divorce and the uncertainty with Natasha. They went to dinner at a nice restaurant. Jennifer talked about her job, her hobbies, her family. She laughed at his jokes. She was easy to be with in the way that requires no effort and no risk. But all David could think about was Natasha. The way she challenged him. The way she made him want to be braver. The way she'd whispered that question in the bar, bold and vulnerable at the same time. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, interrupting Jennifer mid-sentence. This isn't fair to you. What isn't? She asked, confused. I'm not over someone. I thought maybe I could move on, but I can't. You deserve someone who's really here, and I'm not. Jennifer looked disappointed, but not surprised. The one who got away. Something like that? She smiled sadly. Well, at least you're honest about it. Most guys waste weeks of my time before admitting they're hung up on someone else. David drove home feeling worse than before. He'd hurt Jennifer, even unintentionally. And for what? For someone who didn't even want to see him. When he got back to his apartment, there were 3 missed calls from Natasha. His heart jumped. She never called multiple times. He called her back immediately. David? Her voice sounded strange, shaky. What's wrong? Are you okay? I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, okay? Okay, I've been running away from you. From us. Because I'm scared. I told myself it was about work, about the promotion, about not knowing what I want. But that's all lies. I know exactly what I want. I want you. But wanting you means admitting that work isn't enough. That success isn't enough. That I need someone, and that terrifies me. David sat down, his legs suddenly weak. Natasha continued, her words coming faster now. Tonight I was at a company dinner. Big celebration for my promotion. Everyone congratulating me, telling me how proud they should be, how I'm going places. And all I could think was that I wanted to share it with you. Not these people who barely know me. You, the guy who's seen me vulnerable and scared and didn't run away. Natasha. Wait, I'm not done. I've been so scared of losing my independence, of becoming someone who needs another person. But you know what's worse? Living this perfect, successful life and feeling completely empty inside. So yes, come to New York. Please come to New York, because I'm tired of pretending I don't want you here. David felt tears in his eyes. When? This weekend. Next weekend, tomorrow, I don't care. Just come. I'll book a flight tonight. Okay, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Okay. They talked for another hour, and it felt like Miami again. That ease, that connection, that feeling of finally being seen by someone who mattered. When David finally hung up and booked his flight, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope that maybe, just maybe, taking this risk would be worth it. David's weekend in New York was everything he'd hoped for and more. Natasha met him at the airport, and when he saw her waiting by baggage claim, his heart did that thing it only did around her. She ran to him, and they held each other like people who'd been apart for years, not months. They spent 3 days exploring the city. She showed him her favorite coffee shop in Brooklyn, the park where she went to think, the tiny Italian restaurant where the owner knew her by name. They talked for hours, laughed until their stomachs hurt, and somewhere along the way, the physical attraction that had been simmering since Miami finally found its moment. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. On his last night there, they were lying in her apartment, the city lights filtering through the curtains. Natasha was quiet, which was unusual for her. David could feel her thinking, could sense something shifting. What's wrong? He asked, running his fingers through her hair. Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. This weekend has been amazing. You've been amazing. And I'm terrified. Of what? Of this, of us. Of how much I want this to work. She looked at him, and her eyes were filled with fear. David, what are we doing? You live in Seattle. I live here. We can't just keep flying back and forth forever. So we figure it out. One of us moves, or we find something in between, and then what? She interrupted. I change my whole life for you. You change yours for me. Someone has to give up everything, and what if it doesn't work? What if we try this, and 6 months from now we realize we were better as this long-distance fantasy? David felt his chest tighten. Is that what you think this is? A fantasy? I don't know what I think. She stood up, pacing her small bedroom. I've never done this before. I've never let someone get this close. And the closer you get, the more I realize how much I have to lose. You also have a lot to gain, David said quietly. Do I? Because right now it feels like I'm about to blow up my entire life. My job is here. My career is here. Everything I've worked for is in this city. And you're asking me to risk all of that for, what, love? That's not exactly a solid investment plan. Her words stung, but David tried to stay calm. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm just asking you to try, to see if we can make this work. But that's just it, Natasha said, her voice rising. Trying means committing. And if I commit, I'm not the same person anymore. I become someone who needs someone else. Someone who's built their life around another person. And I swore I would never be that person. Why? Why is needing someone so terrible? Because people leave, she shouted, then immediately looked shocked at her own outburst. She sat back down on the bed, her hands shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell. It's okay, David said, reaching for her hand. Talk to me. Where is this really coming from? Natasha was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My mom gave up everything for my dad. Her career, her dreams, her identity. She moved to America for him. Learned a new language for him, worked terrible jobs so he could finish school. And you know what? He left anyway. When I was 12, he just decided he wanted a different life and walked away. And my mom was left with nothing. No career, no independence, nothing but kids to raise and regrets to live with. I'm not your father, David said gently. And you're not your mother. We're different people making different choices. Are we? Because right now it feels like history repeating itself. You're asking me to trust you, to believe this will work. But what if it doesn't? What if I give up everything and you realize I'm too difficult, too scared, too broken? You're not broken, David said firmly. You're human. And yes, this is scary. It's scary for me too. But isn't it worth the risk? Natasha looked at him with tears streaming down her face. I don't know. I honestly don't know. David flew back to Seattle the next morning. They didn't break up exactly. They just agreed to think about things, which David knew from experience was usually just a slower way of saying goodbye. The next few weeks were torture. They barely spoke. A few text messages here and there, but nothing substantial. David threw himself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid going home to his empty apartment, where every corner reminded him of what he'd lost. His friend Robert tried to help, but there wasn't much to say. David had taken the risk, put his heart out there, and it hadn't been enough. Some stories didn't have happy endings. 4 months passed. 4 long gray months where David went through the motions of living but didn't really feel alive. He dated a bit half-heartedly, went out with friends, pretended he was fine, but he wasn't fine. He was in love with someone who was too scared to love him back. Then Thanksgiving came around. David went to his sister's house, sat through dinner with his family, and tried to smile at the appropriate times. But when his nephew asked him why he looked so sad, David realized he couldn't keep pretending anymore. He left early, driving back to his apartment through the quiet streets. It was starting to rain, that typical Seattle drizzle that matched his mood perfectly. When he pulled into his parking spot, he sat in the car for a while, just listening to the rain hit the windshield. His phone buzzed. A text from Natasha, the first one in 2 weeks. I miss you. I'm sorry. I was scared. David stared at the message. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to protect himself from more hurt. But another part of him, the part that had walked on that beach in Miami and felt alive for the first time in years, wanted to respond. He typed back, I miss you too. But missing isn't enough. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I know. You're right. I'm sorry for wasting your time. David felt something snap inside him. He called her. She didn't answer. He called again. Still nothing. On the 3rd try, she picked up. David, don't, she said, her voice thick with tears. Where are you? At the office, working. It's what I'm good at, remember? On Thanksgiving? I don't have anywhere else to be. David closed his eyes, making a decision that was probably crazy but felt absolutely right. Give me your address. Your office address. What? Why? Just give it to me, she did, confusion clear in her voice. David hung up and immediately booked a flight. There was a red-eye leaving in 3 hours. It would get him to New York by morning. He didn't pack a bag, didn't think it through, just drove straight to the airport. Robert called him twice during the drive. David ignored it. He texted his sister that he was sorry for leaving dinner early, and that he'd explain later. Then he turned off his phone and bought the ticket. The flight felt endless. David couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. All he knew was that he couldn't let her spend Thanksgiving alone in an office, convinced she was unlovable. He couldn't let fear win, not for either of them. When the plane finally landed in New York, it was 6 in the morning, raining and freezing. David got a cab and gave the driver the address. The office building was downtown, a tall glass structure that looked cold and impersonal in the gray morning light. Security almost didn't let him up, but he convinced them to call Natasha. 5 minutes later, she appeared in the lobby, looking exhausted and confused. She was wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She'd clearly been there all night. What are you doing here? She asked, but before David could answer, he saw her face change. Understanding, then hope, then fear all crossed her features in quick succession. I'm here because I love you, David said, not caring that security and the night janitor could hear him. And I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. So here's what I'm thinking. I got a job offer in Boston 3 weeks ago. I turned it down because I was trying to get over you. But I'm going to call them back and accept it. Boston? Natasha repeated, confused. It's between Seattle and New York, 3 hours from you by train. Close enough that we can see each other every weekend if we want. Far enough that we both keep our independence. We can try this, really try, without either of us having to give up everything. Natasha stared at him, tears running down her face. You'd do that? Move across the country for a maybe? It's not a maybe, David said, stepping closer. It's an absolutely if you're willing to try. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around him. You're crazy. This is crazy, I know, David said, holding her tight. But isn't that the point? Isn't that what you said in Miami? That life's too short to play it safe? I can't believe you remembered that, she whispered against his chest. I remember everything, he said. They stood there in that corporate lobby, holding each other while the city woke up around them, and for the first time in months, David felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. 6 months later, David stood in his new apartment in Boston, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and wondered if he'd made the right decision. The job was good, better than good, actually. The city was interesting. But standing here alone, he felt a familiar wave of doubt wash over him. His phone buzzed. A text from Natasha. Train gets in at 6, can't wait to see you. And just like that, the doubt disappeared. They'd been doing this for 3 months now. Every other weekend, one of them would make the trip. Sometimes Natasha would take the train to Boston. Sometimes David would go to New York. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. Slowly, carefully, they were building something real. David heard the key turn in the lock. They'd exchanged keys last month, a small step that had felt monumental. Natasha walked in, dropping her overnight bag, and smiled when she saw him. "This place is a disaster," she said, looking at the boxes everywhere. "I know, I've been busy with work." "Too busy to unpack?" She raised an eyebrow. "Or are you keeping your options open? 1 foot out the door just in case?" She was joking, but David heard the real question underneath. It was the question that was always there, hovering between them. "Are we really doing this? Is this really going to work?" "Come here," he said, pulling her close. "I'm unpacking this weekend. With your help." "Oh, I see. You invited me here to be free labor." "Exactly. That's the only reason." She laughed and kissed him, and for a while they forgot about the boxes and the uncertainty and just existed in that moment together. Later that evening, as they were sorting through kitchen supplies, Natasha got quiet. David had learned to recognize these moments. She was working up to saying something difficult. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. "I got offered a transfer," she said, not looking at him. "To the Boston office." David's heart jumped. "What? When?" "Last week. They're expanding the team here and they want me to lead it. Same salary, same position, just different city." That's amazing, isn't it?" Natasha finally looked at him and her expression was complicated. "Is it? Because I've spent my entire life not making decisions based on relationships, and now here I am, being offered exactly what we need, and all I can think is that I'm becoming exactly what I swore I'd never be." "What's that?" "Someone who changes her whole life for a man." David set down the box he was holding and sat on the floor, gesturing for her to join him. She did, crossing her legs and looking at him with those eyes that always saw straight through to his core. "Can I tell you something my grandmother told me once?" David asked. "Okay." She moved from California to Chicago when she was 25. Everyone said she was crazy, giving up her life for my grandfather. But you know what she told me? She said she wasn't moving for him. She was moving for herself, because being with him made her happier than anything else in her life. And choosing happiness isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. "That's a nice story," Natasha said quietly. "But your grandmother lived in a different time." "Maybe, but the principle is the same. If you take this job, are you doing it because you think you should, or because it's what you actually want?" Natasha was quiet for a long moment, picking at the tape on one of the boxes. "I'm scared that if I move here, I'll lose myself. That I'll become Natasha who followed her boyfriend instead of Natasha who built her career. And I'm scared that if you don't move here, we'll spend the rest of our lives in this limbo, never fully together, never fully apart." David took her hand. "But here's what I know. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Moving cities isn't going to change that. The question isn't whether you can handle it. The question is whether you want to." "I do want to," she whispered. "That's what scares me. I want this. I want you. I want a life where I come home to someone who knows me, really knows me. But wanting it feels like admitting I was wrong about everything I believed. Or maybe it means you're learning that what you believed was just a story you told yourself to stay safe." Natasha looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "About 6 months ago, when a beautiful woman asked me a very bold question in a hotel bar." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "God, that feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago. We're different people now, are we?" "I am. I used to think playing it safe was the same as being smart. Now I know that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is take a risk on something real." Natasha leaned her head on his shoulder. "I haven't given them an answer yet. The transfer. What do you want to do? I want to say yes, but I need to know this is going to work. I need to know we're not going to fall apart the minute things get hard. David turned to face her fully. I can't promise you that. I can't promise we won't fight or struggle or have doubts. But I can promise that I'm all in. I'm not going anywhere, and whatever comes, we'll figure it out together. Together, Natasha repeated, testing the word. I'm still getting used to that. Me too. They sat there on the floor of his half-unpacked apartment holding each other, and David felt something settle inside him. This was it. This was what he'd been looking for without knowing it. Not perfection, but partnership. Not someone who completed him, but someone who challenged him to be more himself. 3 months later, Natasha moved to Boston. David helped her move into an apartment 2 blocks from his. Not the same building, not the same apartment. They both agreed they needed their own spaces, places to retreat to when they needed to remember who they were on their own. But most nights they ended up in one apartment or the other, cooking dinner together, watching movies, talking about their days, learning the rhythm of each other's lives. It wasn't always easy. They fought sometimes, about silly things like whose turn it was to do dishes, and about bigger things like family obligations and career decisions. But they learned how to fight fair, how to say what they meant, how to apologize and mean it. One evening, about 8 months after Natasha's move, they were back in Miami for a conference. Different conference, same hotel. They found themselves at the same bar where they'd met, sitting in almost the exact same spot. Remember this place? Natasha asked, smiling. How could I forget? This is where you asked me the most memorable question anyone's ever asked me. I was so nervous that night, she admitted. I thought you'd think I was crazy. I did think you were crazy. In the best possible way. Natasha looked around the bar, remembering. I almost didn't talk to you, you know. I saw you sitting here alone and I almost walked away. I thought, why bother? He probably has a girlfriend or he's not interested or it'll just be another disappointing conversation. What made you change your mind? You looked sad, but also kind. And I thought, maybe just this once I'll take a chance. Maybe just this once I'll be brave. David pulled something out of his pocket. A photo, printed on actual paper, creased from being carried around. It was from that first night. A selfie they'd taken on the beach, both of them wind-blown and laughing. I carry this with me, he said, to remind myself that the best things in life happen when you stop playing it safe. Natasha took the photo, studying it. We look so young here, so uncertain. We were uncertain. We still are sometimes. Yeah, but now we're uncertain together. David stood up and held out his hand. Want to go for a walk on the beach? For old time's sake? In these shoes? You're crazy. I learned from the best. They walked out of the bar hand in hand and headed toward the beach. The ocean was just as vast and beautiful as it had been that first night. The moon was just as bright, but everything else was different. David stopped walking and turned to face Natasha. You never answered my question, you know. What question? That night in the bar you asked me if I wanted to know what you weren't wearing underneath. But you never actually answered. Natasha laughed, that wonderful laugh he'd fallen in love with. And I'm not going to. Some mysteries should stay mysteries. Fair enough. David paused, then said, Can I ask you a different question? Always. Do you regret it, any of it? The risk, the move, choosing this over the safety of being alone. Natasha looked at him for a long moment, and her expression was open and honest and completely sure. Not for a single second. You know what I regret? All the years I spent being too scared to let someone in. All the time I wasted thinking I had to choose between being strong and being loved. And now? Now I know that loving you doesn't make me weaker. It makes me braver. Because every day I choose this, I'm choosing to be vulnerable, and that takes more courage than anything I've ever done in my career. David pulled her close, feeling the ocean breeze around them, hearing the waves crash behind them. I love you. I love you too, even when you leave your socks on the floor. Especially then. They stood there on the beach, 2 people who'd taken a chance on a random conversation in a hotel bar and turned it into something real. Something worth fighting for. Something worth the risk. As they walked back toward the hotel, Natasha squeezed his hand. You know what the crazy thing is? What? If someone had told me that night that I'd end up here, with you, building a life together, I would have said they were insane. I would have said I wasn't that kind of person. And now? Now I know that I wasn't that kind of person. Until I met someone worth becoming that person for. David smiled. So you're